The big questions. Follow the link to our message board. We're also debating live this morning from Bury, do endangered animals need rights, and is football the last bastion of prejudice? So tell us what you think about those topics. Send us any general comments you'd like to make about the programme. Tigers and rhinos are poached for the Chinese medicine market. The polar bear and the giant panda face disappearing habitats, and the giant leatherback turtle, which has been around for 100 million years, is being eaten to extinction. Despite decades of conservation programs and hundreds of films by Sir David Attenborough and others, more than 8,000 species are at risk. Do endangered animals need rights? We've got an academic here who believes they do. University of, and philosopher as well. Just what we need. A philosopher on a Sunday morning. The University of East London, yeah? You think animals should absolutely, all animals, not just endangered animals, all animals, not just lovely furry ones with big brown eyes, but creepy crawlies as well, should absolutely have equal rights with human beings. Explain more.
I do. I mean, I think that the endangered issue is one specific case that highlights the general kind of conflicted relationship with animals in general. We tend to treat animals, endangered or otherwise, as things, or as our property, as a resource for human use, or as an economic commodity. And I think that there's a basic fundamental problem with this paradigm, and we need to rethink it. We need a profound paradigm shift towards treating other animals, including endangered ones, as persons, as creatures that have
our equals.
Rights. Different to us, but morally equivalent, yes.
Yeah.
They're living, sentient, at least sentient beings, creatures that have the ability to experience pleasure and pain and have an interest in continuing their existence.
Do we draw a line then that those creatures are capable of experiencing pleasure and pain with those that are lesser, or you know, like a housefly or something like that? Do we draw a line? Well,
my personal opinion is that we need to kind of extend the circle of compassion as far and as wide as possible. But
let's talk about endangered species. That's what kind of what we're discussing.
Well, exactly.
It's interesting to know where you're coming from.
Well, the endangered species, of course, most of them are sentient beings. So I think we definitely need to extend moral rights to them.
Ian Redmond, UN representative for the great apes, envoy actually, not representative, to beg your pardon. Is she right, or is conservation enough? Because it's not working, is it?
I guess it depends what you want the law to do. Endangered species are almost all listed on a law that protects them. So they have legal protection. There's often very poor enforcement. For the animals that have the capacity to think, I'm inclined to agree, but it is a sliding scale. And at what point, you mentioned houseflies, what about nematodes? I tell my vegetarian friends, every time you eat a lettuce leaf, you're eating lots of little animals, but they're too small to see.
But they're not endangered. Let's stick to endangered animals.
OK, some of them might be.
Great ape, well, OK.
Small creatures are endangered by loss of habitat as well as large creatures.
For example,
but apes are a special case, as indeed are the other animals that you might say have a higher order of intelligence.
Yeah.
So elephants, the whales, dolphins, they have brains bigger than ours, they have complex societies, and I think we need to respect them.
And elephants?
Elephants have a brain, four of us together, our brains might be the same as one elephant brain. And they have many of the attributes that we consider important in terms of family values and loyalty and compassion for each other. So they probably have a higher moral value, if you're going to try and gauge moral value, than a housefly. But they also have a very important ecological role to play.
I think there's a difficulty there with starting to kind of rate creatures according to their cognitive capacities, which of course we do from our own perspective. So the more similar a creature is to us, the higher its moral value on those.
That's what, so why shouldn't we give them rights to protect them if they have these complex social structures?
I think morally it's hard to argue against it. But what I see in any room of people, if you talk about animal rights, you divide the room. And there's a serious debate. If you talk about respect, if you talk about reducing their suffering, if you're talking about continuing to allow them to exist, almost everybody's going to be on board.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is one of the reasons why the United Nations doesn't have a charter or a declaration on animal rights, but it does have organisations, of which I'm involved, that try to ensure that these species and their habitats do survive.
It's about instilling respect, isn't it, for animals? That's maybe the paradigm shift. Peter, you shoot elephants, don't you? And you believe that it's part of conservation.
Yeah, I have done in the past, yeah.
Yeah,
but I think
shooting about 13 or 14 elephants in your time.
Yeah.
But you believe that's putting money into the local community because you have to buy a licence to shoot them, and it's helping, ultimately, the elephants. Some would see that as a paradox.
Well, some would, but I think responsibility, the conservation is responsibility. It's not rights for animals. And I think our responsibility is to protect endangered animals, but we should look at all aspects of doing that and strip away the emotion and look at the actual facts and what we can do for those endangered animals. You've used elephants as an example there.
Complex social structures.
Yeah, very complex.
Are you an elephant
social
lover?
I am. I'm a champion for elephants. But for habitat, I mean, unfortunately, in the modern world, human encroachment is reducing all habitat. So in effect, even though some of these areas are big, we actually are fencing in these areas by human encroachment. If we protect wildlife and animals, we will get an overabundance of population, and at that point we're going to have to manage that. And if we can manage that, hunting is going to have to come into that. And if we can manage that and generate revenue to put back into the wildlife,
they need to be culled.
If hunting is really about reducing overpopulation, why won't you cull humans then? Because, as you admit yourself, it's humans that are overpopulating. So let's cull humans. Clearly, that's not really the issue. Let's just call a spade here. Hunting is killing animals. You can call it culling, you can call it cropping, you can call it population management. You can sort of sanitize language as much as you want, but hunting ultimately is about killing animals.
To overpopulation in habitat would be? What would your answer be?
I think we're looking at a long global project bringing together all the stakeholders, humans, various populations and cultures that live close, to try and find a solution that is non-violent, and to try and find a solution, including, by the way, thinking about, yes, limiting, or thinking about, at least about limiting human or controlling human population as well as animal population.
So are you talking about giving, if I may, giving land back to the animals?
Absolutely. Creating corridors, creating continuity, because, I mean, territory is fragmented. That's one of the major issues in conservation. So you need to create these corridors for the animals, especially the ones who roam like elephants.
As a farmer, there's a terrible paradox has come about here. Is this lady wants to protect all wild animals. Indeed, I love wild animals, and I'm a farmer and I love animals. But the badgers today, which were practically extinct when I was a young man, are destroying much of our dairy cattle, many of our dairy cattle. This year we have killed, it is true, we have killed this year 37,000.
It's not about badgers.
We have killed 37,000.
I know what you're saying, and it is a matter of... it is a matter of some contention. But Yasmine, on our other points, without getting onto badgers, which is a fascinating but separate issue, what about giving land back to the animals, giving animals rights? Do you support that?
We have international conventions on wildlife, but they're not enforced enough. They're not going far enough. And animals are at the brink of extinction. Some conservation experts say that we are in the 6th mass extinction, which means that before we have had 5 mass extinctions in 540 million years until before the fossil records began. So what we're doing today is causing human-made mass extinction.
But
that's not acceptable, it's not legal, it's not
But people
ethical.
like Peter who are shooting them, and so they have to be conserved because it's in the economic interest of the local population to have a good herd there.
There could be
and Mr Mugabe's charging people a lot for licences to shoot elephants. Is that a good thing?
It's totally unsustainable. It may bring in revenue for the short term, but it's not a sustainable solution for the long term. What
currency is what's needed, and positive action. Sporting Rifle magazine last year, we raised a significant amount of money through our magazine for Save the Rhino. That's direct positive action, and that's what needs to happen now. We need currency and direct action, as I'm sure my colleague would agree, and that needs to go directly to the species, not via some government committee. It needs to go through an NGO direct to the species.
I agree with that, but you need to do that through ecotourism, through sustainable methods.
That's a very big part of that, absolutely.
Yeah, but the division between us, the problem in this dialogue is that we come from completely different points of departure, because for you, animals are basically an economic resource that we can use at will. And for myself, and I think for Yasmin as well, animals have inherent moral value in and of themselves, not as something that is for us to use, not as something that we can do with whatever we want. We are here on this earth as fellow creatures. This is an earth that we arrived in, we evolved in successfully, some would say too successfully.
You must feel, I mean, sitting next to somebody who shoots elephants, how do you feel about that?
Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting dialogue to have. I don't have any problem with... it'd be great to be able to convince you, which I doubt I'll be able to do that, but...
What I'd like to convince you is we're from two different sides, obviously. I'm not trying to convince you to be a pro-hunter. I'm trying to convince you to... I listen to your views and and appreciate them. I want you to listen to my views.
Sure.
Not be a pro-hunter, but accept that within a management plan, hunting has its place.
I suppose I object to the word management when it comes to animals. I don't think that animals are for us to manage. I think we're all in this together, to use a familiar phrase.
Isn't that slightly hypocritical?
Alex?
Because look, I come from a Jewish point of view. The Jewish ecological point of view is...
Stewardship.
It's stewardship, yes. In a book called Ecclesiastes Rabbah, there's a lovely story which explains the Genesis story. God takes Adam around the earth, shows him the Garden of Eden and says, don't wreck it.
Eat it.
Don't oh, you... doesn't say interest. He says you have guardianship and stewardship over it. If you don't manage... I believe in animal compassion. My religion says I must feed my animals before I feed my family. It says I mustn't do harm to animals, must pain to animals. But if we let it go haywire, then we are not taking the moral responsibility as higher able beings.
Are we higher beings?
I think we are.
Are we higher beings? Kieran, are we higher beings? He used the phrase.
We are, and we need more human responsibility towards protecting the animals rather than animal rights. I think we should stop meddling in nature, and we talked about finding land for those animals. We're just giving back what we've already taken. I think Hinduism itself preaches that all forms of life should be respected. We should be kind to animals because they all have a soul.
And of course, reincarnation, we come back for a reason, don't we?
Evolving to a higher
Peter's going to come
conscious.
back as an elephant. We know that in the future.
Well, it's karma. Cause and effect.
That's a distinct possibility. Just be ready for it. That's all I'm saying.
It's karma, isn't it? Cause
It's
and
karma.
effect. Every action has a reaction. Yeah. And every soul has a level of consciousness. So, therefore, we should be able to live in this wonderful planet. We have plenty of space.
Yeah.
We should be able to live together.
Liz.
Well, I'm in trouble then, because I got up this morning, washed my hair probably with something that had been tested on a rabbit, put some makeup on, tested on a mouse, ate a couple of bits of pig. I'm sitting now on a dead cow. You know, I think I'm a nice person. I never kick a dog or inflict harm, but I took into my meat all the time. I exploit animals in every way. We always have, whether it was, you know, making some leather shoes or sitting on the back of a horse.
But what about endangered animals?
Well, it's just part of the same thing. I think it's very worthy, and don't mean in that a patronising way, because we're an intelligent creature, at the highest end of the spectrum, as being informed and making choices. So, yeah, ideally, we should respect other animals and protect other species. But at the end of the day, we're part of the food chain. Whether we like it or not, it's ecology.
But we don't eat great apes, or most of us don't. We don't eat tigers.
You would do if you were I mean,
I'm not sure if I could, actually.
I don't know.
Kind of like cannibalism, Ian, isn't it? I mean, you know.
In Zambia, I went to Zimbabwe and I went over the border across Victoria Falls into Zambia. It was a rather bad time for that country. And we were told that people were eating apes, monkeys. The whole country was being denuded of wildlife because they were starving. You know, you don't know what you would do.
Yasmine.
There are underlying problems. I've worked with a colleague in Kenya where they were tackling the bushmeat issue there. And,
chimpanzee, isn't it?
Yeah, well, they were going for smaller dig-digs and other animals. So what they were looking at was that the real issue, or was it something else? And they actually found that the problem was there was no irrigation in their village. And all that was needed was irrigation to grow crops so that they could be self-sustainable. And once they understood that concept, once they all got together as a community to work towards building those irrigations and growing crops, and through humane education, the children got a lot of ideas about respect for animals. They saw that what they had done, and that's what we're discussing today, traditions doesn't make right. Yeah. It actually, something can be changed, and it can be changed for the better, for sustainable ways for people and animals. And I think that was a really successful case story.
What you're talking about is guardianship. I mean, Liz, you wouldn't buy ivory... I hope you wouldn't buy ivory jewellery. If you want to go on television and say you would, ivory. You wouldn't buy an ivory...
Oh, right, OK.
Would you put a panda head on your wall, or a chimpanzee thing, or take up a bile of some, you know, tiger or bear? I mean, that's what we're talking about. It's about
Would you loll around on a tiger skin, ride looking seductive?
It's been offered. The next
Isn't it, Ian, isn't it to our eternal shame as a species that the beautiful animal. The tiger is on the brink of extinction, and the great apes are on the brink of extinction.
It is, and what you mentioned, Rabbi, is part of that problem, that they have become commodified. They've become an economic commodity, and so the laws of economics, the rules of economics, are driving the consumption of those species. And when that happens, if you've got a market that is big enough, and let's face it, the demand for some of these products globally is far bigger than any sustainable offtake, even if you could morally accept killing intelligent animals for profit. It doesn't work. There isn't the possibility to have a natural population and an unlimited commercial market supply it. So you have to either regulate it or ban it, and it's much more difficult to enforce a partial law than it is a complete law. But what you mentioned about compassion is important. I work a lot with the Born Free Foundation, and they've introduced this concept of compassionate conservation. Much of their time and money is spent in helping to resolve human-wildlife conflict in the way that you're suggesting. So yes, there might be some places in the world where sport hunting is a part of management and it works, but there are an awful lot of places where it doesn't work. And there are alternative systems which are more compassionate and will achieve the same objectives of helping people improve their lives.
I'm sure that's true, but there's an awful lot of places where it does work very, very well. I mean, Zimbabwe was mentioned, and the campfire initiatives, and meat goes back...
Campfire initiatives have been...
what are the campfire initiatives?
It's a program which sport hunting was a central part of helping communities get finance from looking after wildlife. But it is
hunting.
You don't need to shoot them. I went to Zimbabwe and I didn't shoot anything.
Let Ian finish.
It is a program which has been riddled with corruption.
Right.
Because when there's lots of money sloshing around and not a good system of governance, it often goes in the wrong pockets. So it may have worked in some places somewhere, but it had a huge amount of aid money propping it up, and if you took away the aid money, the general consensus among many of my colleagues is that it would collapse. But the principle about involving communities in managing the wildlife and habitats around them, that is good, but there are ways of doing that are compassionate and respect the animals and the ecosystem services that people in that area and globally derive from those animals, because elephants and gorillas are not just ornaments, they're part of tropical forest ecosystems that we all benefit from, and therefore their protection shouldn't be down to, we're down to the last few. I mean, there aren't many Stradivarius violins left, so they're endangered. Every time there's a fire in a stately home, another one might go up, but they don't have rights in the way that a sentient animal does.
Yes, sir, you've had your hand up all through.
Exactly. I mean, animals, I agree, they're actually part of our ecology. And if we don't protect the endangered species, whether they're animals or birds or insects, then we are going to suffer at the end of the day. I mean, look at the example of the bee. We're all told, we've been told now that the disappearance of the bees is threatening our very existence. So whenever any animal is being threatened with extinction, then we need to, I mean, as a Muslim, I agree with much of what's been said by our Jewish and Hindu sort of colleagues, that we should have this attitude of guardianship. They are therefore, they've been entrusted to us, and therefore we need to make sure that we take all measures to protect them.
Thank you very much. Thank you, yes. Jasmine.
Come back to your point about money, because what we're actually doing is, if we don't take action, then it will cost us a lot more. Like Anat Pick was saying, that the ecosystem provides services to humans, it benefits us as well. Clean water, clean air, arable land, ecotourism, sustainable recreation, and maybe using resources such as medicinal herbs and plants. If we don't take action, it will cost us far more than when we invest now. And the European Commission report actually estimated that by 2050, it may cost us 14 trillion euros by not taking action in lost ecosystem services. So we need to invest now. We don't have 14 trillion euros. We need to do something now. And the current conventions are not going far enough. We need rights, because they will actually send a stronger message to the world.
And extinction, Nikki, is such a huge tragedy for the whole environment, I think. And in some ways, we are misusing the powers that we have as humans over animals. We shouldn't be hunting the tiger or using them for their skin. We should just be able to respect all beings as we are in this, like I said, this whole planet is full of God's creation. And it's about being kind to one another, not misusing our powers being higher up the chain.
But we wouldn't be here if certain species hadn't become extinct. It's an ongoing process. It's evolution.
We don't know that, I don't think, but...
Well, I'll make that sweeping statement.
Yeah, why not? Thank you very much indeed. And in an expression of higher primate body language, put your hands together. Thank you very much. The apes do that. The apes clap. Yeah.